The air in the U.S. Embassy conference room was sterile, silent. Across the table, I watched the blood drain from the face of Gunther Miller, the arrogant CEO, my future father-in-law. His disbelief was a tangible thing. My commanding officer, a U.S. Army colonel, gestured to me, his voice flat. "Mr. Miller, your firm's security protocols are a joke." Gunther started to object, but the colonel cut him off. "And the analyst who led the red team that breached your secure network in under an hour? Well, you already met her at dinner." He paused, letting the weight fill the room. "Captain, the floor is yours." I stood, the fabric of my Army service uniform crisp, and met Gunther's horrified gaze. My eyes felt like ice. But to understand how I ended up being the one to deny my future father-in-law's multi-billion-dollar NATO contract, we have to go back 2 months. To a dinner that was supposed to be a celebration. We flash back 2 months, an opulent restaurant in Berlin, all dark wood and crystal. It was supposed to be a celebration. I was there with my fiancé, David, a man I loved, though he was a kind but ultimately weak-willed corporate lawyer. He was desperate for the approval of his father, Gunther Miller, a man who radiated an old-world arrogance that set my teeth on edge. Beside him sat his wife, Helga, a woman who was quiet, traditional, and clearly lived in her husband's shadow. I was in my uniform at David's insistence. "My father respects the uniform, Eva. He'll love it," he'd said, so eager. I knew better. But I did it for him. Gunther's eyes raked over me, and he gave a thin, dismissive smile. In perfect English, he said, "A woman in uniform, how impressive. A fine patriotic hobby. A hobby. My entire career, my clearance, my life's work, reduced to a hobby." I felt the familiar, cold sting, the one I'd felt 1,000 times when underestimated. But then, he turned to Helga, assuming I was just some dumb American. He muttered in flawless, aristocratic German. "Too bold. No man can handle her. She will bring shame to David." Too bold. David, whose German was barely passable, just beamed, missing the nuance entirely. But I didn't. I felt my spine turn to steel. I slowly straightened my posture, lifted my wine glass, and met Gunther's eyes across the table. Then, in the same flawless, high German he had used, I replied, "Thank you, Herr Miller," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I assure you my boldness is considered an asset to NATO, and my fiancé has absolutely no need to handle me." The silence that fell was absolute. It was so thick you could have cut it. David choked on his water, his eyes wide with panic. Helga's hand flew to her mouth, her gasp audible. But the best part, the only part that mattered, was Gunther. His face, just moments before so smug, drained of all color. The rest of the dinner was an Arctic tundra. Gunther thought it was a simple, private embarrassment. He had no idea he'd just shown his entire misogynistic hand to the very officer vetting his company for their most important contract. I remember David trying to explain my job to his father a few weeks before that dinner. It was almost painful to listen to, watching him stumble over himself. "She's in logistics, I think?" He'd stammered, trying so hard to make me sound palatable, non-threatening, and small. Or maybe translation. "Something at the embassy. It's very safe, mostly desk work." I just stood there, smiling quietly, letting him paint a picture of a demure secretary, letting him be comfortable. Gunther had beamed at this description, patting David on the head like a prized golden retriever. "Good, good," he'd said, that same dismissive smile I'd come to know. "A woman needs a hobby, something to keep her busy." He then draped a heavy arm over David's shoulder, steering him toward his study, leaving me in the hall. "But the Miller family legacy? T is your job, son. You handle the real business." Through the open door, I caught a glimpse of the blueprints on his desk. The codename Project Jaeger stamped in bold red in the corner. That was the real business. A hobby. My safe desk work was a lie I had allowed them to believe, a necessary, carefully constructed fiction to keep my two worlds from colliding. The reality was a different universe entirely. My reality wasn't an embassy desk. It was a skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility, buried deep in patch barracks. It was a world of windowless rooms, the constant hum of air-gapped servers, and the cold blue light of encrypted networks mapping all of Europe. I wasn't in logistics. I was a captain in counterintelligence, and I was leading a red team exercise. The target on our main screen, the one we'd been tasked to break, was all too familiar. It was Project Jaeger. I stood before my commanding officer, my voice crisp and devoid of emotion as I gave the brief. "Sir, the Miller AG Project Jaeger proposal is a house of cards," I said, pointing to the dataflow map. "Their entire digital footprint is a disaster. We ran a black box penetration test and breached their primary firewall in under 40 minutes. My CO raised an eyebrow. "How, Captain?" he'd asked. "A simple OSINT vector," I replied, my voice flat. "Open source intelligence. Their senior project manager has his dog's name and his kid's birthday as his recovery phrase, all publicly available on his social media. Their internal culture is sloppy, dangerously sloppy." My CO was Colonel Thorne, my commanding officer, a grizzled but fair man who saw me as a protégé bent, one of the few men in my life who had never once underestimated me. He stared at the screen for a long moment, his fingers steepled, and his expression was grim. He didn't question my findings. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He just nodded, slow and deliberate. "Captain Rostova, your analysis is chilling. And it is correct." He looked up at me, his eyes sharp, the professional cutting through. "This isn't just sloppy, this is a threat. You are officially lead on the Operation Iron Sieve counterintelligence assessment. This Miller AG contract isn't just a business deal, it's a massive security risk to NATO." And so my two worlds, once so carefully separated, began to blur. One night I'd be at our apartment, patiently nodding as David fretted over wedding invitations, the cream cardstock versus the ivory. He'd be agonizing over flower arrangements and seating charts, and I'd be mentally running threat models on a compromised supply chain. The next day I'd be back in the skiff, my analysis identifying a critical, gaping vulnerability in NATO's entire European defense posture, all originating from Gunther Miller's real business. After that disastrous dinner, David tried to apologize, to smooth it all over. "He's just from a different generation, Eva," he'd pleaded, wringing his hands. "He doesn't get it. Just let it go." I just nodded, the engagement ring suddenly feeling impossibly heavy on my finger. "Oh, he doesn't get it, all right," I thought to myself, the coldness settling in. He doesn't get that his different generation attitude isn't just offensive. It's a reportable security flaw. He's not just a misogynist, he's a liability. David saw a language gotcha. He saw a moment of social awkwardness. I saw a critical failure of operational security. For years, I had kept my two worlds separate, building a wall of silence between them. But after that dinner, Gunther Miller had just made his company's internal culture, his arrogance and his bigotry, a matter of my official duty. The next morning, I stood in front of Colonel Thorne's desk. The night replayed in my head, the arrogance, the hobby, the shame. But I pushed that down. This wasn't about my feelings. This was about my clearance and a potential breach. "Sir, I have a formal declaration to make," I began, my voice steady, professional. "A conflict of interest. The CEO of Miller AG, Gunther Miller. He is my future father-in-law." Thorne leaned back, his hands clasped, just observing me for a long moment. He nodded slowly. "Understood, Captain." And noted. He tapped the Iron Sieve file on his desk. "But let's be clear. Your initial findings, the red team breach, the sloppy OSINT, all of that came before. This relationship was a factor. Those findings are what flagged them." He leaned forward, his voice firm but fair. "The protocol is absolute, Rostova. You're off the lead for the final op, but you are now a material witness. You must submit a formal contact report and a full threat analysis on all your interactions with Gunther Miller." He was giving me an order, a lawful order that protected us both. It wasn't personal anymore. It was procedure. This wasn't Eva the angry fiancé. This was Captain Rostova, the CI officer, My goal wasn't revenge, it was a correction. I had a duty to protect the integrity of the procurement process, a duty required by the very security clearance Gunther thought was just a hobby. So I went back to my terminal. My fingers moved deliberately over the keyboard. Every ounce of emotion was channeled into cold, precise, analytical language. I wrote the contact report, sanitizing the insult into procedural fact. Subject demonstrates poor personal OPSEC, operational security. I typed, openly discusses sensitive contract ambitions, namely, Project Jaeger, in unsecured public environments. I detailed the dinner, the arrogance, the assumption that I couldn't understand him. Subject exhibits high susceptibility to flattery and confirmation bias, and his dismissive attitude towards protocol indicates a high-risk internal corporate culture. I sent the encrypted file to Colonel Thorne. He read it, then added it to the main iron sieve file. That one dinner, that one moment of pure hubris, was the final, devastating piece of evidence. This, he said, holding my report, combined with the red team's breach, it's conclusive. He looked at his aide. Schedule the final contract review. And make sure Mr. Miller attends in person. He needs to hear this. Gunther accepted the meeting immediately, assuming it was a formality to sign the deal. He even told David to book a celebration dinner for that night. He had no idea he wasn't walking into a signing, he was walking into a security debrief. The secure conference room at the U.S. Embassy felt like it was pressurized. The flags of the U.S., Germany, and NATO stood behind the head table, stiff and silent. On one side, Gunther Miller and his legal team, all smug confidence and expensive suits. On the other side, my side, sat Colonel Thorne, 2 JAG officers who looked like they were carved from granite, and me. I was in my full uniform, my iron sieve file open on the table in front of me, its pages filled with his company's every failure. Gunther strode in, all smiles and backslaps for his lawyers, clearly expecting a quick celebratory signing. Then he saw me. He froze. His smile didn't just fade, it curdled. He looked at Thorne, then at me, then back to Thorne, his face a mask of confusion and irritation. Was ist das? He snapped, forgetting his English. What is this? What is she doing here? He gave a dismissive little laugh, waving a hand at me. Is she taking notes? I didn't move. I just watched him. That was the moment, the last echo of his arrogance before the fall. Colonel Thorne didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just gestured calmly toward me. Mr. Miller, Captain Rostova is not here to take notes. He let the silence hang for a beat. She is the lead analyst for the European Command's counterintelligence red team. You might know them by their internal call sign, Operation Iron Sieve. Thorne tapped the file in front of me. It is her report. We are all here to discuss. I watched Gunther's lawyers start to shuffle papers, their eyes wide, a dawning panic spreading between them. Gunther, however, just scoffed, a desperate, hollow sound. This is absurd. She's a translator. She's a logistician. He was still clinging to the convenient little box he'd put me in, the patriotic hobby he'd invented so his world could still make sense. He looked at me, his eyes demanding I confirm his lie. I stood up. The room suddenly felt very small. I did not speak in German. My voice was cold, precise, and procedural. Every word in flawless, unaccented English. Mr. Miller, I began, and he flinched at the authority in my tone. My report details 14 critical security failures in your company's infrastructure, and it all starts with your own lack of discretion. His face, which had been pale, started to turn a blotchy red. Your secure servers, I continued, my voice cutting through the silence, were breached by my red team in under 40 minutes. Your employee vetting is non-existent. We found 3 high-risk individuals with access to your source code in 2 hours. Your personal financial exposure is a high-risk vector for foreign intelligence services, making you a primary target for compromise. I took a step closer to the table, and I finally looked him dead in the eye. I leaned in just slightly. And your personal operational security. I paused, letting him sweat. is non-existent. You openly discussed sensitive contract information and personal biases in an unsecured, public environment in a language you simply assumed. I couldn't understand. He was ashen. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked broken. Colonel Thorne cut in, his voice like gravel. The Department of Defense cannot, in good conscience, award this contract to a firm with such glaring, systemic vulnerabilities. The Iron Sieve report is conclusive. He closed the file in front of him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Miller AG is ineligible for any NATO-affiliated contracts for a minimum of 5 years. He stood up. This meeting is over. Gunther just stood there, swaying slightly. He wasn't just humiliated. He wasn't just financially ruined. I watched his face as the final terrifying realization landed. It wasn't anger I saw in his eyes. It was a dawning, abject horror. The horror of a man realizing he wasn't just rude. He was stupid. He had spent his whole life believing no man could handle me. In the end, his entire billion-dollar legacy couldn't handle one sentence from my after-action report. The Miller AG legal team filed out in a kind of stunned, funereal silence. The door to the conference room clicked shut, leaving just me and my side of the table. The air was still thick with the wreckage of Gunther's entire worldview. I started to gather my files, my hands steady, my movements precise. Colonel Thorne caught my eye. He didn't smile. Thorne wasn't a smiler. He just gave me a single, respectful nod. Good report, Captain. That was it. From him, it was more than enough. It was everything. It was acknowledgement, it was validation, it was respect. I found David in the main embassy lobby. He was pacing, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. The moment he saw me, his fear curdled into a hot, misplaced rage. He rushed at me, his voice a low hiss so he wouldn't make a scene. "What did you do?" he whispered, his hands clenched. "What did you do? My father, you ruined him. You heard them, you ruined him. You ruined us." I just looked at him, really looked at him. And the last lingering scrap of the illusion I'd been clinging to, the man I thought he was or could be, it just disintegrated. It shattered into dust. He wasn't worried about the security breach. He wasn't horrified by his father's arrogance or the danger he'd put people in. He was just a Miller, worried about the contract, the legacy, the shame. "No, David," I said, my voice as calm and flat as it had been in the briefing. His own arrogance ruined him, his bigotry ruined him, his sloppiness ruined him. I tapped the file I was still carrying. I just filed the report. I did my job. I saw the confusion in his eyes, the utter inability to compute what I was saying. "The same job," I said, my voice turning colder, "that you told him was safe desk work. The same one you told him was a hobby. You asked me to choose David. You and him and your entire family. You've been asking me to choose from the day we met, to choose between being small enough for you or being myself. Today it was just formal. You asked me to choose between your father's ego and my duty, my oath. But it's my family," he pleaded, his voice finally breaking, the little boy coming out. He didn't get it. He would never get it. This was the moment I'd seen coming for months, the one I'd been dreading. All the dinners I'd sat through, all the casual dismissals I'd swallowed, all the times I'd let him explain my life in simple, non-threatening terms. It all led to this. "No, David," I said, the finality settling on me like a weighted blanket. "It's my country, and I just learned you'd ask me to choose. So I will." I pulled my hand from his grip. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the engagement ring from my finger. It was heavy. It had felt heavy for a long time. I looked at it in my palm, a beautiful, expensive symbol of a life I could never, ever live. A life of being handled. I placed it, gently, into his open, trembling hand. "I choose my duty," I said. He just stared at the ring, his face a mask of disbelief. I turned and I walked away. My back was straight. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor of the embassy, and I did not, not once look back. 1 year later, the world was different. I was different. I was standing in a state-of-the-art NATO command center, the glow of tactical maps washing over my face. But I wasn't a captain anymore. I was Major Rostova. I was holding a briefing stick, not a file, and I was briefing a room full of high-level NATO officials, American, British, and yes, several German generals. I was conducting the entire threat assessment in fluent, technical German, outlining vulnerabilities in the Eastern European corridor, and every single person in that room was listening. They were hanging on my every single word. That night, my real family threw me a promotion party on base. It wasn't a cold, formal dinner. It was loud and warm and full of people who had been in the trenches with me, people who knew exactly who I was. Colonel Thorne, who was set to retire, raised a glass. His voice was gravelly, but there was a warmth in it I'd rarely heard. "To Major Rostova," he said, looking right at me. "Most people come here and learn the language. She came here and, well, she's the standard." My eyes burned, just a little. That was the validation. That was the legacy. The Miller Ag story had ended exactly as it had to. A few months after the debrief, a small article in a business paper confirmed it. Miller AG ousts CEO Gunther Miller after NATO contract debacle. The board had forced him out, his own arrogance the weapon of his destruction. I sat in my new office, the one with my new rank on the door. An email popped up, and my heart didn't even flutter. It was from David. It was the first one in almost a year. It was short. "My father, he's out, the board fired him. I'm at a new firm, I just wanted to say, I see it now, I'm sorry." I read the words. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe even 1 year ago, that email would have wrecked me. It was the apology, the admission, the validation I had craved for so long. I looked at it, my expression calm. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even triumph. Just quiet. My peace was no longer dependent on his apology. My worth was no longer tied to his family's acknowledgement. I moved my mouse, clicked archive, and the message vanished. I turned back to the glowing map on my screen. I had work to do. My fiancé's father believed my boldness was a liability. He learned too late that in my world, it's a prerequisite, and it's the one thing he couldn't afford to underestimate. There's a difference between bold and competent, but sometimes you have to be both. If you've ever had your expertise dismissed, only to have it become the one thing that matters, share your story in the comments. In this community, we value the report, not the rumor.